Communal violence has now spread throughout the country, but the breakdown in Sri Lanka's multiracial society is nowhere more apparent than in its capital of Colombo. Officials admit to 17 factories having been destroyed in arson attacks in recent days. The real figure is probably much higher. The factories are owned by the Tamil minority here. Whole sections of Colombo where they live have been under attack by extremists in the majority Sinhalese community. Many have been beaten, some have been burned alive in the streets. Due to the apparent indifference of the security forces, the Tamils have thrown up their own barricades to protect themselves. Up to 35,000 Tamils have been made homeless by the disturbances. Those who can't find room in the 9 refugee camps in the city are living on the streets under constant fear of further attacks.
Sri Lanka is an island in the Indian Ocean with a population of 15 million people, 3/4 of whom are Sinhalese and 1/5 of whom are Tamils. There are also Muslim and other ethnic minorities. Most Sinhalese are Buddhists. Over 2,000 years ago, their ancestors settled on the island of Lanka. So too did the Tamils, most of whom are Hindus. Traditionally, Tamils have lived in the north and east. During the period of British rule, Tamils moved south in search of jobs. Another community of Tamil speakers was brought from South India by Britain to work on the plantations. Most of these were settled in the central hill country. The colonial government was not above using ethnic divisions to make its task of ruling easier. Tension increased. Sri Lanka became independent in 1948 but kept its close economic links with Britain. Soon after independence, most of the Tamil plantation workers lost their right to vote. The government moved groups of Sinhalese settlers into mainly Tamil areas. In 1956, Sinhala was made the only official language. Tamil leaders organised peaceful protests. The police broke them up by force. There were anti-Tamil riots in 1958. Tension grew and the armed forces were sent into the north and east. Tamil politicians argued for devolution but were ignored by successive governments. Finally, in the 1977 election, candidates of the main Tamil political party were voted in on a platform of complete separation. They asked for a Tamil state in the north and east.
None of the Tamil boys are given a place in the medical college, engineering college, universities. Even if they get the highest marks, the disqualification, the one and only disqualification is you are a Tamil. And they are not given. That is how the boys got frustrated.
The new government, headed by J.R. Jayawardena, had pledged to end discrimination against Tamils. Instead, there were repeated pogroms, and in 1981, rampaging soldiers burnt much of the northern town of Jaffna, including the historic library. Meanwhile, some frustrated young Tamils had taken to arms. The government's response was the draconian Prevention of Terrorism Act. Young men were seized, ill-treated, held without trial, and in some cases murdered. This was condemned both by Amnesty International and by the International Commission of Jurists.
Sinhalese government never discloses what is happening. If you are in Sri Lanka and if you are in Jaffna, you know what is happening. Sometimes even the people in Colombo don't know what is happening in Jaffna. Suddenly the army will come in 2, 3, 4 trucks, round up the bus stand. All the young boys waiting for buses or on the bike, everybody will be stopped, put in the truck and taken.
Anger against the government grew, and with it the guerrilla movement. Some cabinet ministers took a stance of open hostility to Tamils. There were attacks on Tamil civilians in the coastal town of Trincomalee and other areas. A carefully organised pogrom against Tamils in southern and central areas began at the end of July 1983. Questions have been asked about the part played by senior members of the government. Gangs of men with lists of Tamil households moved through the capital, Colombo. Homes and businesses owned by Tamils, and in a few cases Muslims, were burnt. The police and army took